Hi, this is an update of my BMC64 project. I just wanted to demo a few new features added since my last video. The latest version available is version 3.3 from my website. The first major change is that since version 3.0, all emulator kernels are now packaged with one image. Before that release, you would have to have manually copied or renamed kernel images for each machine you wanted to emulate. But now you have a menu option to switch between the different emulators, which makes things much more convenient. So here is the menu option. It's under Machine and then Switch, and you'll see all the supported emulators there, and underneath each machine type you'll get a number of different video options. So this will reset your Pi and switch the machine to that video mode, and whether it's HDMI or composite. I included a PAL 50.125 Hertz mode here and an NTSC 59.825 Hertz mode. Those video modes match the timing of the original machines, although I don't set those as defaults because they're not standard HDMI modes and they might not work on all monitors. But basically this is how you would switch, and it's much more convenient than having to manually copy files and edit config.txt or command line.txt. The emulator will now edit those files for you, so you really don't have to touch them anymore. And the way you configure that menu is there's a machines.txt file that sits at the top of your SD card image, and every entry you see in this text file ends up showing up as a menu item under that machine switch menu. And the format is pretty straightforward, although it's pretty repetitive. You give the machine you want to emulate, the video standard, the output device, HDMI composite or DPI, and then a short description of what that actually means. And this way you don't have to edit those files manually anymore. And the second change is that I added two more Commodore machines to the emulator, +4 and PET. After I added the +4 emulation, someone on the Lemon forum commented that many demos and some games didn't run, or they didn't run well. Some didn't run at all. So I investigated a bit, and it turns out that Vice's +4 emulation turned out to be quite lacking. So I investigated other options and brought in another emulator called +4emu. So this is the GitHub link for the +4emu. It's Istvan V's great +4 emulator, and it's a much more accurate emulator. It handles all the modern or more modern demos and modern games, whereas Vice just didn't. Unfortunately, it takes more CPU, and for that reason it's not available for the Pi 2. It's only available for the Pi 3. And so just to demo what can go wrong with the Vice version of the +4 emulator, just running a demo called Shade. And you can see it kind of starts off okay, but then it runs into trouble. You can see the background there, it's not rendering correctly, and then it crashes horribly. Okay, so this is the +4 emulator running the same demo called Shade. So you can see this demo runs quite well on +4emu, whereas the same demo would either crash or have video glitches on Vice. And since I brought in a different emulator, I did some work to reorganize BMC64's code to add a layer of abstraction between the menu and input handling logic and other things, so I can reuse as much of that code as possible between different emulators. So instead of things being all intertwined with Vice code, I separated it out, so things look more like this, and that way I'm able to plug in other emulators. Another major change was the addition of DPI support. DPI is an up to 24-bit parallel RGB interface, and this is an example of an adapter that will convert DPI signals to RGB using 3 resistor ladders. DPI devices are all different, so you don't get any of the DPI video modes unless you add them to machines.txt. My README file on the GitHub page will describe how you can put those together yourself. The ones here will work with the VGA666 adapter, but you'll have to come up with your own output format settings that matches your DPI display device. And it looks like these modes, or these video modes, are not exactly 60 or 50 hertz like HDMI, so it's likely the case that every time you add your own video mode, you'll have to have custom timing. So you have to use the custom HDMI or the custom timing tool to figure out what those are. Otherwise, you might have audio synchronization issues. And keep in mind that DPI uses almost all of the GPIO pins. So if you're using DPI, things like GPIO joysticks or keyboards or buttons are disabled when you're using a DPI output device. And special thanks goes out to GitHub user K. R. Navarro, who suggested this feature. The fourth thing is I added support for user port joystick adapters. This is something that Vice supported, but I just didn't have the menu options for. I tested this on Bomb Mania, which can support up to 4 players at the same time. So obviously the game has to support that particular adapter. But this way you can have up to 4 configured USB game pads, or you could use 2 real joysticks plus 2 game pads if you want. The fifth thing that is new since the last video is I added a virtual keyboard. And it's not perfect, but if you are using this on a device and you don't have a keyboard, this comes in handy. At least you can load games or get directory entries and kind of cursor around and do the bare minimum that you might need to do. And then lastly, there are new GPIO config options. So I started out with just GPIO config number 1, which is the real joysticks and maybe some navigation buttons. But then I ended up working on my own PCB, where it's kind of like a key-raw form factor, but the keyboard and joysticks are scanned with GPIO pins instead of USB. So I added a GPIO config option to the menu under Prefs, and you'll select either 1, 2, and the third one is to support a WaveShare game hat. So someone contacted me and asked me if it was possible to support that device, and it turns out it was fairly simple to do because those buttons are all basically just GPIO buttons, and it was just a matter of remapping what BMC64 expects for those buttons. In the future, some ideas I have in mind for future updates. I'd like to do a user port modem simulation over TCP/IP connections. Probably bring in dual SID support. I'm working on a Pi 4 build now, and I'd also like to support PWM audio out, so that BMC64 could be used with one of the Game Boy Zero cases. So it turns out that it kind of does work, the one with the composite video, but the audio doesn't come out because it's expecting it to either come out of the audio jack or the HDMI device, and neither of those are actually hooked up on the Game Boy Zero, so it's expecting the audio to go through PWM pins. So I'm hoping to get that done pretty soon. All right, that's about it for now. Thanks.